in 22 states, in half the European community and all of Southeast Asia, people say to this guy, good for you. Only one place in the entire world does somebody say, must be nice. And you're living in the middle. Now, we're breaking out of that Saskatchewanander thing. But of course, must be nice imports envy, must be nice imports distance. Must be nice doesn't sense the fact that you're sharing or you're rejoicing in good stuff. And you're celebrating it. So, it's things like this that really got me fired up about this book. In the book, I also get a little bit into what Seymour Lipset, and I don't quote Lipset because he's far too highbrow for this book. This was a funny book. You could take the guy out of the law firm, but I wrote the first draft of the book and it looked like a factum or a legal brief. Like I had to go in and add contractions. I actually went into the first pass, Suzanne was editing and says, you got a bunch of stuff here that isn't sentences. There's just one word, and I said yes. And she said, you use slang, and I said yes. So I tried to make the book like I was talking to you. For that I apologize. Some of you, talking to you is enough. Now you have to hear me on the book. But when I did this kind of approach, and again, I don't quote Lipset, but Seymour Lipset, the biographer of Saskatchewan socialism, actually referred to what he called exceptionalism. And this is another thing this book spends a lot of time on. Because part of lowered expectations, fear of change, fear of success, and fear, loathing, and envy is exceptionalism. Saskatchewan's different. It's the Saskatchewan way, don't you know? Now, I don't know, all of you travel a lot. All of you get out. Have you ever walked into a bar in Stettler? Or walked into a hotel lobby in Winnipeg, looked around and said, gee, I'm sure different. There's not a single thing different about any single Saskatchewanian. But this culture of exceptionalism has been bred through our politics because it allows us to avoid best practices. Because the worst thing you can do when you're just like everyone else is then hold yourself to benchmarks. I don't know any of you in business who don't benchmark. You don't set objectives. If you can't attain targets or exceed them, you've got to explain to somebody why. Only in Saskatchewan politics. Because it's the Saskatchewan way. And that culture of exceptionalism has been almost a defining point of the political left and the NDP in particular. Now, so I spent a little time poking that balloon. The three things that I think have doomed the Saskatchewan way, and it can't come too soon, thanks, are cheap airfares, the internet, and the 500-channel universe. I was talking to a group earlier today, and I apologize if I'm digressing. When I was in high school, if you were smart enough and savvy enough to get a copy of GQ, the men's fashion magazine, I'm talking high school like dinosaurs, almost, okay? I could forecast what men in North Battleford would be wearing 3 to 4 years from now. Because there was GQ was a year later in Toronto, it was a year later in Edmonton, it was a year later in Saskatoon, and by the time you were in North Battleford, you were hip and happening 4 years later. Have you noticed today, something is on a runway at a fashion show in Spain, and a 24-year-old woman in Balgoni has got it FedEx to her within a day and a half. And the fact that she's 24 is significant too, because the overarching dimension of cheap airfares, because everybody travels, you get out somehow, the internet and the 500-channel universe is we're interconnected and interdependent like we never were before. But the beauty of the 24-year-old is she is in the millennial generation. People born since 1982. People born since 82 have never, it's the most traveled group in history. It's also the group that the change curve is the most evolved. You know when Justin Bieber's first album came out? 10 months ago this week. A year ago, did you know who Justin Bieber was? Lady Gaga's first EP was out 2 years ago. Now, I can't walk around and not be bombarded by Lady Gaga or Justin Bieber. 2 years ago, you never heard either of them. Try being really cool someday and talking to a kid about their gaming console. You're still using the Xbox, PS, whatever, and they look at you and go, that's so 2005. You're so out of it. Now, technology, like I've got a BlackBerry that I bought 3 years ago. Even among my friends, it's a relic. Kids don't understand anymore technological cycling that isn't going on within the calendar year. So are you going to try and sell to a group of people aged 29 and under and 30 and under, are you going to try and sell, ooh, in Saskatchewan, we're different, we're very special? Nope. Are you going to sell fear of change? Their lives are change. And they have the change matrices more accomplished than you ever will. They understand anticipating the objection, they understand what the possible risk is, they understand weighing against what the present loss is. A 16-year-old kid goes through that calculus every time she changes her phone. So the NDP rooted message of fear. And I actually went back to NDP campaigns going back to 1944. I read Commonwealth magazines going back the last 20 years. I read Hansard going back to that. No sympathy? There was a message of change aversion and change resistance that was shocking. Virtually every NDP election campaign since '44 has been about fearing change, fearing something unknown. That doesn't work with people who are under 30. So, I'm going on much longer than I should, but in many respects, this value set that deals with adapting to technology, adapting to pop culture, adapting to a group of people who also want to say, we're not exceptional, we're fabulous, and this is the place I want to be in. But there's a difference between living in the greatest cities in Canada and carving out a system that avoids best practices. Because none of us win when you don't measure yourself or benchmark. So that's a little about it. I spent some time on the 03 campaign, and while Brad Wall will not be unhappy with this book, a number of his policy advisors will be quite embarrassed by this book, because I take a lot of smacks on the head at, I think I call them the rookies, I call them incompetent. I use a lot of terms to describe the Sask Party Brain Trust, which was actually an oxymoron in 2003, frankly. I'm sorry, Doug, are you here? I spend a lot of detail from the position of the insider. I spend the same thing in '07. But I talk about how Saskatchewan started to change under the NDP and they didn't see it. And there's a lot of change afoot now. And I'll leave you one more thought on change. One of the great things to increase and up and change an attitude is success. Because you don't need people making you fear for security, making you fear for these things. Opportunity and success breeds even more. The other beauty, and I talk demographically about younger people, the other beauty is immigration. I never met a person in my life who moved to a new place for security, other than refugees who needed safety. But the act of moving somewhere is sheer opportunism, in the best way. My dad moved here from the UK when I was 3. He saw a life that was exciting beyond words in this small prairie town where you could actually go shoot ducks. And in fact, I found the recruitment letter they sent him in 1960. It was hilarious. These are all Irish doctors. There's an activity the local people do called curling. It involves sliding on ice, Brackett will describe that to you later, and throwing large stones, not at one another, but on the ice. So he kind of got into curling too. But people who move to a place move for opportunity. So the population when Mr. Calvert leaves government, he was very fortunate he was able to get it back up to just about 1 million, just over 1 million. Today it's 1,045,000. A lot of people here moved here because they want opportunity. The other beauty is the largest international immigration since we've been keeping international records. And that was in 1943. We'll do 12,000 immigrants a year this year to Saskatchewan. 12,000. The best we'd ever had in the past was one spike under the NDP when they hit 4,500. Most years it was 1,800 to 2,200. 12,000 in 1 year. And the funny thing about people who move back from other provinces and people who come looking for hope and opportunity from new parts of the world, they didn't get the memo. They didn't, nobody tuned them in. This is Saskatchewan. Lower your expectations, please. This is Saskatchewan. Relentlessly pursue mediocrity. Nobody told them any of that. So in many respects, these new Saskatchewanians are showing the new face of Saskatchewan. This is an exciting time. So my last word is the call to action. I lament what happened. I rant a lot. But the call to action is that every single one of us owns this province. And we own, more than casting a ballot, we own the value system. And this is a big land for big people with big dreams. And I'll add one to Walter Scott, big accomplishments. So this book, many in the political left will see it as a nasty diatribe. It's a bit of a diatribe. But it's not that nasty. Because it speaks of a lot of values, and it speaks of what I think we can be in Saskatchewan. So, sorry, I went on much longer. I hope I haven't put anybody to sleep. But this has been a real pleasure and an honor to David, and thank you very much for having me here today.